Xuanli Liao. I'm a senior lecturer at the Center for Energy, Petroleum and Mineral Law and Policy of University of Dundee. Actually, my background is international relations, and then now I'm actually dealing with China's energy diplomacy as one of my research focus. So today I'm very honored and pleased to be here. Thanks for Victoria, Dr. Victoria, and also Dr. John Chinda and Dr. Stephanie. So I was asked to give a talk about China's energy diplomacy and also financial institutions, um, which I have tried to, link both together. We should have another speaker as well. I was relying on him to give more information about institutions, financial institutions, but now he cannot come. So I will just try to get things, presented as I have prepared. But if you have got uh, more questions, you are welcome to ask me. So what I would do today is to mainly give you a picture about the origin of China's energy diplomacy from 1990s, and also the change and the new century, and also what has happened under the Belt and Road Initiative. And in the later part, I did, involve something about the financial institutions, but that is not really the focus of my presentation. So, origin of China's energy diplomacy was started, from the 1990s. In 1993, China became a net oil importer. Then, from that time on, China started to have its energy diplomacy. Um, it was aimed at the time for resource seeking, but it was highly linked with politics as well. So the initial stage of China's energy diplomacy was focused on the belt regions. The term was raised by Professor Yang Guang, who was the director of the Institute of African and West Asian Studies and the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. So he raised this idea to say it was a belt regions, which means it was Russia, then Central Asia, and Middle East, and North Africa. So it was basically near the Chinese borders, other than North Africa, which was Sudan. Of course, it had a good political relationship with China. So the next slide, I will just to try to show you the energy, China's energy mix versus oil supply, which is to give you a very brief picture about what has happened. Here, this is the latest actually information about China's energy mix. You can see oil now accounts for 20% of China's energy mix, and then coal is still 57%. Okay, but among those 20% of oil consumption, China now relies on 70% of imports from various countries. The other chart you can see was to show from the 1960s, and the time China started to produce oil, and for a period of time, China even could export some to other countries. But from 1993, it became a net importer. Then it just went on all the time. So this was a consumption level, and here it was a production level. So all the gap here would be needed for oil imported from outside the world. Okay. So now we come back to the energy diplomacy. We have said about the belt regions. So with Russia, it was just like on the northern part of China. The energy cooperation with Russia was driven by both strategic interests and oil interest. So that was a good combination to allow the two countries to work together. And this has allowed the two regional powers to maintain a smooth relationship despite of their disputes, which I'm not going to details unless later on, if you're interested, you can ask questions. So here I just gave an example of the cooperation between those two powers. The oil pipelines from Russia to the Far East. So it was agreed between Russia and China initially to build an oil pipeline from Russia to China. But then Japan came over to say, okay, they wanted this to be built to the Pacific coast. That was in the early 2000s. Then there was a 2 year of deliberation, and then Russia decided to say, okay, we will build this whole oil pipeline, but the first phase would be built first. So from Texas to Varadino, and then the Chinese would build one from here to the oil field Daqing. So now this has been built already 10 years ago. So it is supplying oil to China. To Central Asia, actually, energy was not really the driving force for China's energy diplomacy there. Rather, China wanted to use energy as a kind of, instrument to serve its purpose of national security, because here, this is Kazakhstan, and this part is China, Xinjiang province. At that time, there were kind of independent movements there, and China didn't really have much political kind of, establishment with the Central Asian countries. So China used energy to be a instrument to gain those countries to cooperate with China. So now Central Asia has become one of the major oil and gas suppliers to China. And then China's energy presence in the region has also enhanced its geopolitical significance. Of course, that was something I implied. Russia was not very happy about this, but then China was trying to use the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to, get things balanced. And also it was, showing that, okay, it wouldn't really want to compete with Russia. But now the situation is like China is in a leading position economically, but in political and security aspects, Russia is still the leader, for those countries. So here, this is the oil pipeline from Kazakhstan to China, and this is a gas pipeline from Turkmenistan going through Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and going to China as well. So now this is something, has happened due to China's energy diplomacy. In the Middle East, actually, oil supply was a main driving force for China's energy diplomacy there. But then you think, okay, that was simple. But as a result, the regional stability became a major concern to China. And also later on, I will mention about the Iran nuclear crisis. Then China was also one of the major parties involved in that kind of process of crisis management. So here, I just want to show, this is also the latest information from the BP statistics. You can see that still Middle East is the major region to supply China oil. So from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Oman, and Iran, Kuwait. So those are about 50% of China's oil imports. Okay, then the rest, of course, Angola, Russia, and Venezuela, even some from the US are also, supplying China's oil needs. In Africa, actually, Sudan was the first African country for China to invest in the oil sector, which was not really something planned, but it was like there was an opportunity. Then the Chinese government invited China to go there to say, okay, can you please help us, because the Western oil companies withdraw due to their just ongoing civil wars for really decades. Then China was invited to go there. But then now China's investments, not only just in energy sector, but also in other sectors, have covered almost all the countries in the continent. And there was a very latest, I mean, not very latest, but recent kind of news. December 2019 was saying Chinese companies committed 1.4 billion investment in uh, bankable energy projects in Africa during African Energy Chambers visit. Because then in 2020, the COVID-19 was there. So this was kind of the face-to-face, maybe one of the major activities China and African countries have got. And also this graph is to show the Chinese loans to Africa, which would be related to this kind of debt trap, um, the new criticism to China's presence in Africa. But here you can see how much loans China has provided to Africa, and this went to the peak 2016. Now came back slowly, but it is one of the serious issues for the moment of China's dealing with Africa. Then that was the initial stage, how China started its energy diplomacy in the, I mean, belt regions. But of course, already I have, just put the talk a little bit, up to the latest situation. Here, I want to mention something about the changes occurred. There was a going global strategy issued in China in 2003. The Chinese NOCs have played greater role in China's overseas investment. By this time, it was not just the Chinese national oil companies, but also all kinds of companies, manufacturing, infrastructure, railways, even hydropower, all kinds of companies were encouraged to invest overseas. And Africa is one of the major destinations for Chinese companies. And corporatization, and three oil majors were listed as international stock market, so could focus more on market efficiency and resource seeking. Before this, the main oil companies would rely on the government reports largely. If they have got problems, even financially, they have to rely on the government, favorable policy for their financing overseas. And also, if they want to invest overseas, even if they have got money themselves, they have to get the permission from the government. But now they want to do more, operations independently, with their own decisions. And there was a example, Sinuk, once wanted to take over Unico in 2005, and then the U.S. Congress just, denied this deal. However, this action was done by Sinuk. Only later on, they, reported to the government, not beforehand, which shows their, willingness of, acting independently. Okay. And also NOCs are more keen to play a role on the international oil markets as a kind of, a competitor. Because the Western companies often said, okay, you always rely on the government supports financially and politically, so we can't compete with you. And now the NOCs wanted to show that they are also businessly, they are competitive, with the Western oil companies. And the NOCs relied only partially on policy banks. The two main policy banks are China Development Bank, which is CDB, and also Export Import Bank of China, which is called uh, Chexim. Um, Chexim, yeah. Uh, they had their own bank, which was called Kunlun Bank. And I heard a joke. The Kunlun Bank was there, but not many people knew that was belonging to CNPC. So even once a top, a high-ranking leader heard about, oh, that was the CNPC Bank. So they were really very powerful, those national oil companies. But politically, Beijing still attempted to avoid irritating other major powers. For instance, the Iran nuclear issue. China actually had a lot of investment before that came up as a crisis. So you can see the Chinese position is a little bit different from America and also the EU countries. But of course, it shared something with Russia. Um, it was largely because China had a lot of oil and gas related deals with Iran. However, China did work with the Security Council permanent members and the EU members to deal with this because China doesn't want nuclear proliferation, to be broken. So it did cooperate with the other powers, and also Darfur crisis. China was criticized, for a while. 2008 Olympic Games was also a little bit, I wouldn't say largely affected, but a little bit affected. And China also later on had some adjustment of its policy in order to show that it wanted to, behave as a responsible stakeholder. Okay, so it's just like you have got financial, business competition, and political, controversies, but China is trying to, manage things in a reasonable way to um, cooperate still with other powers. And then I will just come to talk about China's energy diplomacy in the BRI era. BRI is the Belt and Road Initiative, which was proposed by President Xi Jinping in 2013. So in Moscow, in September, he proposed this, about the economic belt and road project, which is on the line. It was, I mean, if you talk about ancient Silk Road, it was this Silk Road, okay, on land. And then in Indonesia, I think it's October or November. Then he also talked about maritime. Sorry, excuse me. Maritime route of Belt and Road Initiative. So this pink one is the maritime one. So now when we talk about Belt and Road, this blue one was called Belt, economic belt, and this is Maritime Silk Road. Okay, so the whole scheme involves 71 countries and half of the world's population. Um, it is a multi-billion-dollar scheme covering a wide range of projects, infrastructure, and roads, railway, ports, energy, and even some other types of projects. So some people call that as China's Marshall plan. Of course, China said, "Well, this is not. It's just something we want to help the developing countries to develop their economy." But perhaps there is something China wanted to show that okay, we can offer our experiences and also give you some resources, if that can help your development. So if you compare with this era, the Chinese overseas outward foreign direct investment and the BRI era gave more focus on development assistance rather than resource seeking. So now, two policy banks, CDB and Chexim, plus four state-owned banks provide more than 90% of BRI financing. However, initially, you can see here, I have this data. Between 2014 and 2017, 91% of energy sector loans to BRI countries went to the fossil fuel industry. So when China went to invest in those countries, mostly developing countries, it doesn't really have a kind of blueprint print to say, okay, we would do what for you, and then this would be beneficial to all of us. I think it was really a kind of a test to say, okay, we are willing to do something to make some investment. Then what do you need? And then they will say, okay, what we need and cheap, and that can develop our economy. Then China doesn't really have a kind of, high standard of environmental kind of standard or the kind of ideas. So it was really criticized very heavily for its initial investments, because if you talk about 91% of energy sector loans went to fossil fuel industry, that is very bad. Okay. And coal-fired power plants accounted for 40% of the BRI projects. And the BRI countries, excluding China, China invested there. But here we are talking about the emissions, which was excluding China. The BRI countries accounts for 26% of global CO2 emissions. But then if China's investment was also largely went to fossil fuels, I mean, that was very serious, especially given the significance of climate change now, in every country's agenda. Okay. This had triggered a lot of criticism from international community, and also put the banks and disproportionate financial risk from BRI's environmental impacts. So it is almost like, China was intended maybe to help, but then the result was not as expected. But it was really quite a negative picture until 2017, and even there were 2018, there were something still there. So here, greener BRI energy financing is in need for sure. So this slide, I just want to talk about, the BRI renewable projects. What is a problem? Why China didn't invest, get greener financing for the BRI projects? Here, there are some reasons, some from the cost countries and some maybe from the Chinese side. One is lower power prices in BRI nations due to intensive competition during project bidding. So those countries are not very rich, financially. Then they just wanted the bidding to be, okay, whichever cheaper ones, because our power, electricity cannot be very expensive. So we'll just go with the lowest bidding. So if it's the lowest bidding, you can't have really very environmentally friendly, I guess, projects, winning that. That was lower power prices in those host countries. Also, a lack of sovereign guarantee from host countries, because maybe similar reasons. The governments don't have a really a reasonable environmental standard, and also financially they are not really strong enough to provide the guarantee. Okay, a sovereign guarantee. And then incomplete policies on taking up and pricing for renewable energy. So this is to talk about, in advanced country, more developed countries, when the renewable energy was not really competitive in the market, then the government would provide the subsidies. Okay, then to those companies to say, okay, you go for that, but then we'll provide subsidies. Then you can still compete with the the other cheaper ones, but more more polluting ones. So the renewable energy can develop in this process to be able to compete later on, even when the subsidies were withdrawn. But those countries didn't have such a kind of uh, capacity to make the policy, and then of course partially again financially, perhaps they were not really in the best place to do so. And then there was also a reason Beijing has not set a green bond standard in alignment with international standards. So in China, there were, I mean, now they are correcting this practice, but for a few years, when you talk about green bond in China, it was not just purely about renewable energy, but about, for instance, if clean coal usage, they would put clean coal as also part of green bond. But green coal is not, it is brown for the international standard. So for that, the Chinese standard is not in alignment with the international standard. Then, of course, if it is for the BRI countries, then it might there might be a problem. So what can China do to improve the situation? One is for capacity building to help those countries to say, okay, you could make some policy which the government can support the renewable development, then to avoid having too much fossil fuel power whatever stations built at the first place. So you should start from greener paths. And also to help fund BRI renewable subsidy mechanisms via overseas aid, because those countries wouldn't have the strength to provide subsidies. Then perhaps the Chinese government could provide foreign aid, but that could play a role to be the subsidy for uh, renewables, and to give more emphasis on climate change than pollution. So in China, what I was talking about, for instance, you talk about clean coal. Clean coal, it is better for improving the pollution locally, but it's not for climate change purpose. It can't reduce much CO2 emissions. So, but CO2 emissions are the things internationally the countries are paying great attention. So you do have to divide the pollution and climate change emissions, and also to blacklist Belt and Road pollution projects to discourage fossil fuel investments. So this has started. They would have the blacklist. The banks, if this kind of projects are on the blacklist, the banks won't provide loans to them. Okay, so those are the suggestions from the scholars, think tanks, to say what they can do to get that. Here, I'm concerned a little bit about the time. So how much time do I have? Can I have 2, 3
Yeah,
minutes?
because because Mr. Mauman is not there, I think you can you can have his time.
Thank you.
So,
Okay. Okay, thank you. And so here, this is just to show that, sectoral distribution of Chinese overseas development finance in energy. Here, if you see energy efficiency has, of course, if you look at the percentage, it's not a big percentage, but shows progress. Okay, China has put something more in the right direction, I would say, but maybe the situation now is still really, the progress is still slow. And exploration and extraction, you can see from 32% to 16%, in the 2 periods, 2013 to 2016, and this is 2017 to 2020. Of course, this is a total one. We will just ignore this one, but to see the progress made here. Okay. I think there was some mistake here because otherwise this is 2%. I don't know why here it is just 0%. I don't know what is that. And also multi-purpose, and here power generation. You can see 44 to 55. But here it was not talking about it is renewable or it's fire, coal-fired plants. But I did give some data, in previous slides. So I would think majority of those are coal-fired, but later on there are some renewables as well because this is up to 2020. So I do have some projects showing you in a moment. And transmission and distribution, uh, there was a huge, I mean, considerable increase here. From 9% to 21%. So you can see from exploration to energy efficiency and also to transmission and distribution. Uh, if you have got a good infrastructure for energy distribution and transmission, then renewables, when renewables developed, there is a good chance for those countries to really take off. um, and here, this is one of the last ones. Yeah, the two slides, following two slides would talk about, the new trend. So between 2016 and 2019, CDB and Chexim slashed the lending by 85% because you heard about the debt trap. So, but renewables are the exception. For the first time ever in 2020, financing for renewable energy projects using solar, wind, and hydropower accounted for more than half of all of Chinese investment in energy infrastructure around the world, according to a report by the Green BRI Center and Central University of Finance and Economics in Beijing. So that was, just founded a few years ago. This is a link. Actually, it's a very interesting piece. This is reporting that, whole um, opinions. Um, Also in 2020, CDB and Chexim issued only 8 overseas energy sector loans to 8 countries, totaling 4.6 billion, down from 8.1 billion in 2019. So in the past few years, China's loans, overseas loans, have been declining all the time. I mean, for obvious reasons, but one of those was debt trap. Okay, that was the criticism. Chinese banks are also increasingly co-funding projects alongside multilateral development banks to mitigate reputational risks because it won't do even the Chinese banks any good if it doesn't really change its reputation. Here, those are the 8 um, projects we mentioned about. So Africa and South and Southeast Asia are the focus of RB, BRI, actually BRI loans. Nigeria, um, Cote d'Ivoire, Rwanda, Lesotho, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Cambodia, and Serbia was the only European nation to receive a Czech-same loan for the construction of a district heating system for Belgrade. So here you can see it was really the gas pipeline and hydropower, and here you have got solar PV plant, and then you have national power grid network upgrade, and then here there is a kind of, I'm not too sure about this one. It is perhaps this is coal-fired. I'm not sure it is solar or it is coal-fired. But it's mainly hydropower and gas, and um, and also here there was 7 phase rural power grid extension. So it becomes maybe greener than before, but of course maybe more needs to be done, could be done as well. Okay. So here, can China enable a greener BRI future. This is just something I want to show you. This was 22nd of February. The Chinese State Council issued a document, which is, well, it's a long name, guiding opinions on accelerating the establishment and improvement of a green and low carbon circular development economic system. So this sets ambitious and comprehensive direction to put China on a greener development path. But this paragraph, why I quoted here, was to respond to the international standard and China's domestic standard directly. It also promotes the convergence of international green finance standards and encourage Chinese financial institutions to internationalize its green finance activities in order to accelerate the bipartite, bipartite co-investment and international fundraising of Chinese financial institutions, for example, in the Belt and Road Initiative. So this one just directly mentioned about convergence of Chinese financial standard and international green finance standard. Okay, so I really hope, I mean, if the State Council has issued such a document, then the future financing um, from China should be much greener than before. Finally, I have come to the conclusions to just have a summary of the Chinese energy diplomacy over the past 30 years. So it has changed from resource seeking to development assistance. And the early stages, the energy diplomacy not only helped ensure China's energy supply, but also allowed Beijing to project its political influence globally. So from the Belt regions to globally later on. The debates over China's international role have been ongoing ever since. So whether China was trying to challenge the international order, what was China's intention, all kinds of criticisms, or there were some praise from some countries, but, a lot of controversies were there. But, the debates were really triggered here. But, there was no doubt that China's international influence have been growing in this process as well. Okay. And energy diplomacy remained an important part in China's BRI scheme, but the objectives have changed substantially because this time China's focus was not to get energy back home, but to provide, financial assistance, even, engineering, maybe even labor support to the BRI countries for infrastructure, energy projects, or whatever. But the focus of criticism has then changed from political principles to debt trap and green financing. Efforts have been made by Beijing for improvements, but the geopolitical implications are what matter the most. Because, I mean, if China didn't do that well, then they would say, okay, you have set the debt trap. But actually, if you really read some articles, I'm not saying China has done everything, correctly without a problem, but really, I saw some articles talking about China has got some issues, but the debt trap was really something, unreasonable blame because China didn't have this blueprint when it went out to say, okay, we'll lend you a lot of loans, and then, okay, that would surpass your capability of returning, then we'll just then get some other advantages. That is really not the case. I think really if you use common sense, you should really look at the things from a more kind of wider kind of perspective to see what has happened. I think China has got a lot of issues to resolve, but perhaps it was not deliberately to trap BRI states. So this is me. Thank you very much for your attention, and comments and questions, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Janet, for this interesting presentation that went into the beginning of China's diplomacy or actions, place in energy diplomacy to now, with you have made some comments that are really interesting for green financing. And I will have some question, like one question just. So I will start and then I will give the floor to Mr. John. So my question is, you have shown that China has built a relationship, connections with like everywhere in the world, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, by implementing projects and import, export, and all this. And I wanted to know, for you, what are the motives of China? Why is China doing this? Is this just to help, as you said, help in financing projects because they want to help build infrastructure, or is to have a kind of strategic and influence in each of this place in the world, like to be in Africa, to have this strategic influence, to be one of the main player when it comes to relations or diplomatic relations? So what is your view about that?
That's an excellent question. I'm not sure. I mean, of course, I'm not representing the Chinese government, so it's not official answer. But this is really a very good question. I think perhaps I can divide the Chinese motivations maybe into three aspects. The first one is to say, okay, China has developed from a developing country, quite poor country, low income country, into really now it's number two economic power. So China wanted to really show the developing countries, less developed countries, to say, okay, you will be able to develop your economy. Just perhaps our experiences could be, learned, could be your lesson, to for your development. The second part is that China now has got, by the time the BRI was initiated, China has become really a quite, I wouldn't say high income country, but a reasonably rich economy. So it has got a lot of capital and manufacturing capacity and all kinds of, capacities, which China wanted to. I mean, domestically, it was kind of, surpassed the domestic needs. So it wanted to put those overseas and then to the less developed countries, to say, okay, we can, support your development. Of course, it's not like a selfishness less, selfishness lessness. It's kind of a win-win. We have got our surpassed capacity, but then if you don't have enough things, then we can really help you to get things done, which would serve both of our purpose. And then the third one actually was something you have mentioned. I think when this BRI was proposed, um, I'm not sure how much that was in Xi Jinping's mind, but I think perhaps it was part of this initiative to actually, if you do invest overseas and in a large scale, and in really a very broad range of projects, your influence will be, increased enormously. I mean, I was talking about even just energy diplomacy has enabled China to project its soft power to some extent. Of course, China's soft power was somewhat problematic, so not many countries would really like it. But this BRI is not about soft power. It is really partially, yes, if you say, okay, China has developed from the low level to a high level, that there is something there, but it's mainly about finance, about the engineering, design, and those kind of stuff. But then China's influence will be enhanced for sure. And then that is something I think actually more controversial than, and the BRI era, China's, intention was more controversial than the early stage of energy diplomacy, I think, because at that time it was like mainly would serve China's energy needs. But this time it is not that China would just get things back home. Rather, China wants to, just support you guys. But then in the end, of course, China's influence will be enhanced as a natural consequence, I think. Yeah, I think.
Thank you very much for
I
your
think.
answer, Dr. Janet. So
Thank you.
now, Mr. John.
Yeah.
Thank you, Janet. We have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
I also have a few questions I would want to ask, but let's get a question from. This is a question from. I forgot. Can't get the name here now. But it says, "Why is Serbia? Why is Serbia the only European country to receive a BRI loan? Is it somehow related to the fact that it is not a European Union member?" Sorry, Janet, I think it will be proper that we just, if you can take the questions down so that I can just answer them at once. Is that okay by you?
Sure. Sorry, now I think I'll try to see, because now I can't really hear you very clearly. I'll see whether my headphone would work. Sometimes it doesn't work well.
No.
No, it doesn't. It's very strange. Sometimes it would work okay. Some other times no. Can please say something? I'll see whether I can hear. Please try. John, can you please say something?
Can you
see
hear me, Dr. Janet? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Stephanie.
Okay, so I don't know.
But not
yeah,
from
John, I think we can't hear you now. I don't know why.
It's not through my headphone.
So I don't know what is going on with John.
I don't know. Yeah, please. Then can you repeat the question, because I heard the formal part okay from John. It's why there is only one.
So the question was, the question is from I think Stephanie. So she's asking, why is Serbia the only European country to receive the BAI loan? So she asks if it's related to the fact that it's not an European Union member. So this is I don't know if you want to have all the questions, or you want to answer one at once. Oh, now I can't hear you.
Stephanie, can you hear
me now?
Yeah, now John, yeah. Now I can hear you, John.
Okay, so I'll just answer this very quickly, because this is partially because I didn't want to have a too long presentation. Already it's too longer than I wanted to. It's not that Serbia is the only country who has received BRI loans. That is wrong. I was lying. It's only in 2020. This 8 ones, because the BRI loans were reduced slowly in the past few years. So the latest ones are greener, but then mainly focused in Africa and Southeast Asia. Then in this batch, Serbia is the only European country who has received it. But as a whole, China's investment is not heavily into Europe anyway, because the European countries are not very how to say uh, embracing the Chinese the BRI scheme. So that is another reason. So if you do have some, there were some countries who are warmer to the BRI, who are the East European countries. So including the vaccine, you can that is basically the reason. But it's not that in the whole BRI projects, Serbia is the only country. I'm just when I was talking about this later part, Serbia is the only country, but there were some other uh,
No, Janet, are you
projects.
here? Can you hear me, Janet?
Yeah, yeah. Now I can. Yes.
Okay. No, the question is not. It's limited to European Union members. Serbia the only European Union members? That's where the question is tailored towards, not generally. If Serbia is the only European member that is giving the loan.
Serbia is the only country didn't have the loan. But the information I saw
Okay, the
was
question
different.
here is why is Serbia the only European country to receive the BRI loan? Is it somehow related to the fact that it is not a European Union member? That's the question.
Well, the BRI, yeah, but why it has to be a European Union member? It's I mean, it is a European nation. It's not talking about it is a EU member. It is a European country. Uh, we are talking about here, Serbia. So here, actually, what I wanted to show is that uh, Africa and South Asia was a main focus. And at least we are talking about those, latest batch of loans. And Serbia was the only European nation who received the loan. But it doesn't have to be a European Union member. Why European Union was mentioned?
That's the question we have.
Yeah.
Okay, let's leave that and go to the next question because of time.
Yeah.
So thank you for your presentation, but please, if I may know, how is China financing its energy transition with respect to its fiscal regime changes? How is China financing its energy transitions with respect to its financial regime changes?
You're talking about the domestic one, energy transition, or it's about it's energy diplomacy?
I think it will have to do with energy diplomacy because even if it is, my thinking is even if it is local or international, uh, the diplomacy will affect its resources internationally as well as nationally. So let's look at it from both angles.
Um, wow, this is okay. This is I'll try. I'm not sure if I'm the expert on, the financial system, but I did read quite something to prepare, this presentation. I think domestically, China's domestic energy transition is financed differently from its BRI scale. Domestically in China, actually, you don't have to have just the state-owned banks or policy banks to finance. All the other banks, if they can, they want to, they can finance the projects. Doesn't matter it's solar or wind or whatever. But of course, you need. I mean, I was talking about the standard of green financing. That was a problem even inside China. So I mean, if you define clean coal is a green bond, then the foreign you know creditors would have a problem. That was something inside China when they financed this kind of uh, projects, and even at the early years, China just borrowed this to finance overseas ones. They thought, okay, if it's not really very dirty ones, if it's clean coal, or if the host countries wanted those kind of things. They don't have a strict green standard. So that was something, the main issue. But inside China, the financing institutions can be state-owned or can be private. It doesn't matter. But outside China, it's not about private ones are not allowed to provide finance. It is allowed to. But why I was talking about, 90% or more than 90% of those projects were financed by the state banks, it was because if you want to finance the BRI projects, you need to have the guarantee, get your assets domestically as the guarantee of your overseas financing. Because you don't know, I mean, those countries, host countries cannot provide sovereign guarantee. Then all the other countries, the state-owned countries, of course, they have got enough strength. The private companies, if you need their assets to be deposit, to get this kind of guarantee to do the BRI financing, it is very difficult for them. That's why very few private companies have provided financing for the BRI projects. That over 90% are done by state banks. Sorry, you're muted, John.
I was saying we really don't have time. Thank you for that answer. Fortunately, the next question is still has to do with accounting. So would you say that, this from Mark Odega, would you say that there has been an improvement in accounting for environmental and social concerns as part of the shift in energy diplomacy?
I really have to say, firstly, I'm not a specialist on accounting, but I think perhaps I don't know. I mean, for accountant, how you really you would use this form, but I did read some um, articles, some pieces talking about the environmental. Because I mean, again, we have to come back to the standard, the environmental standard or green bond standard, because that is not. I mean, the Chinese standard was not in alignment with the international one. So when the Chinese one is lower than the standard one, then the host countries doesn't have a a good standard for environmental impacts. Then the Chinese investments made faced a lot of criticism. That was something I wanted to show you. 90 something percent, to fossil fuels, and 40 something or 50 to coal-fired plants. So, okay, the investment had been made. It was not that they have two accounts. They thought when they made the investment, this would fit within the Chinese standard and also the host country's standard. However, it doesn't fit the international green standard. That is a problem. So I would say, if I understood the question correctly, it's not that, in accounting times, they have got two accounts, but they have got lower standard. It's one, but the standard has to be raised. And now they are doing that. That's exactly what I want to show. From the State Council document, they wanted to have the standard matching the international one. And also those, state banks want to maintain their international reputation. So now they would get the third party together to finance the projects. Then that could get everybody happy, I guess. Thank you.
Sorry, Vicky. The last question before we turn to you is from, I hope I get this right, Zheng Li. Says, thank you for your wonderful presentation. Do you think BRI is another pattern of revolution exports like the 1960s? It says
Sorry,
on
there is another revolution of
pattern of revolution export, like
exports.
in the 60s, 1960s. That is China's act. So do you think, I think the future of BRI countries are highly dependent on the intention of CCP. Another, I wouldn't know that. I think that's a statement he's making. So the second question he has is, does Chinese government have enough power to drive BRI countries' green energy revolution? So the first question is, do you think BRI is another pattern of revolution export like the 60s? And does the Chinese government have enough power to drive BRI countries' green energy revolution?
Very interesting. I'm not sure I understood the first one, whether there would be a revolution of exports. Um, I guess, well, if you talk about I mean, Belt and Road Initiative, as for instance, someone was saying they compared this with Marshall Plan, which was after the Second World War. The Western countries, I mean, especially the US, the US actually, this was initiated. So they put this kind of Marshall Plan to assist the European countries to have their economic recovery. That was a large scale, to many aspects, to European countries. So many people just compared the BRI scheme to the Marshall plan. But of course, President Xi Jinping didn't think that was really the Chinese intention. He was saying, well, actually, we are not going to say we are saving others. We are helping, almost like a saving those countries to recover. But we want to have this. We want to build this, community of the human being. So, well, sounds like a very um, noble and grant. But I guess, one thing China does not deny is that it is something China really wanted to help the less developed countries. That is why, I mean, it was talking about 71 countries with so much population. It's basically about largely developing countries, because now, of course, some of the advanced countries would cooperate with China in a limited, extent, to a limited extent, to cooperate with China in this, scheme. But most countries who have benefited from the scheme is developing countries. So it it's I mean, I don't know, exports, it is not really exports kind of related things. Well, before this, China was called the factory of the world. Yes, China exported a lot of things, but this time it was not about exports. It is about investments. It's about providing assistance to infrastructure, um, and energy development, and also to basically, China has got this, one of the experiences in China's open door and economic development was to say, okay, if you get your infrastructure ready, later on you develop your economy would be much easier. That was something China wanted to really to learn its lesson to the other countries. So I guess maybe it's not really about exports. The second one is about CCP, whether CCP can make the BRI as a kind of green revolution. I would say, well, of course, CCP now is a leading party in China. I would say perhaps I would avoid this political part, but I think if you look at the general kind of principles now, um, I mean, there are many issues, I mean, under debates, and China is face criticism, and I quite agree with those as well. However, I think what we can also see is that China is, doing things by learning in this scheme as well. I mean, I was saying initially it had a lot of fossil fuel related investments, and now it is focusing on more hydropower, renewables, and cleaner, energy. And also now, I mean, the debts were criticized. China has now just reduced the debts, the loans enormously. Okay, in the past few years. So it is like if you talk about China as a kind of a state rather than a party, because it's not just party. The whole state has got 1.3 billion people. I mean, the Communist Party is like they have got maybe nine, 90 million the party members. So only party members cannot make things happen. So I want to talk about the Chinese government and maybe the Chinese people, and also a lot of companies were involved. uh, because here I think I hope you can. I mean, um, whoever raised the question, I hope you can understand my situation here. I'm now talking in the Chinese territory. So, and also that is also my belief anyway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet. Thank you also all that has attended. Fortunately, I'm seeing the director. She's a little eager. We're short about time. Uh, if you have any other questions, please you can direct it to either Victoria Nalule or you can send those questions directly to Dr. Janet. Janet, thank you very much. Thank you, Victoria, for the opportunity. Thank you, Steph, for also co-moderating this with us. Appreciate. Thank you. Over to you, Victoria, please.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Janet. That was a very brilliant discussion. And I note this is the first time we're actually holding a webinar on energy diplomacy. It's a very important topic which most people tend not to pay attention to. But thank you very much for the brilliant discussion. John, Chinda, and Stefan, thank you very much for moderating. And our participants, thank you very much for your time. I note that the webinar is live on my YouTube channel, which has more than 1,000 viewers. So I'm sure other people will watch it afterwards. Do not forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel and also take note of other upcoming webinars. We have one on Friday, which is focused on taxation and transfer pricing for oil and gas multinational oil companies. And then we also have one on the 12th of March on energy justice and climate change justice. But I also note under the name website, that is Nalule Energy and Mining Consultants, we have more than 100 videos on energy and mining featuring different experts from different countries. So do not forget to subscribe. Thank you very much for your time. And this marks the end of our webinar. Bye-bye.
But maybe can I say just a few words to really, I would like really to thank Victoria for kindly organizing this workshop because webinar, because this is the first ever webinar on just energy diplomacy, hosted by CPMLP. So really, I mean, I was very glad and honored to be here to talk about the topic, and you have got some brilliant questions raised here, and thank you so much really for John and Stephanie. Thank you all very much, and Victoria, wish you all the best with your future professional and personal life. I'm sure you will do wonderfully well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.